The business rules are defined under the policy setup in Interact HRMS. Each and every module of Interact has a setup area where you define the underlying rules. The key policy setup for an integrated HR, payroll, and time deployment requires you to define the payroll calendar, leave policies, time and attendance, shift patterns, compensation, and deduction policies, and sometimes time clocks. The setup and configurability of Interact's modules applies to all modules, so other examples could be the risk management policy setup, garnishment policy setup, performance management setup, and much more. Let's look at the leave policies. Here you can see that you can define any number of leave policies, and these are highly configurable, since leave or time off is one of those areas heavily regulated and dependent on local legislation. The setup of a leave policy includes defining rules on accrual rates, which can be based on seniority, days worked, and even age or experience. We can also define how carryover will work and how to treat weekends and holidays, which fall within the leave period, how to make provisions for leave and whether leave can be paid out. Interact supports both pay in lieu of leave as well as leave in lieu of pay. These leave policies will then be associated with specific employee groups so that the right employee inherits the correct leave policies instantly upon hiring. Note that the principle of inheritance in Interact also means that while the employee can inherit standard rules from the group he or she belongs to, the policy can be changed at the individual employee level as required. Time and attendance rules are critical as Interact's payroll uses the time records directly from its time management module. If no time records are available, then the system can generate a default automatic timesheet based on an employee's regular work hours as defined in the system. Time records can be imported from Excel, or they can be pulled in automatically from time clocks. They can be entered manually also, either by timekeepers or by employees through self-service, or using their smartphone. Time rules are completely configurable in terms of how overtime and absent time are to be calculated. Different rates can apply for each earning, and rates can differ based on the type of overtime. For example, daytime, evening, nighttime, holiday, and rest day. These particular overtime rates can also depend on the type of holiday itself during which the work is performed. Since work hours and work schedules can be different by employee group, this setup is very extensive. All of it integrates seamlessly with the resource scheduling module, which supports 24/7 shift patterns. The Resources Scheduling module supports scheduling people in team format across multiple projects, locations, contracts, and clients in a 24/7 shift pattern with equipment availability constraints and more. Here you can see there are 77 standard pre-programmed shift patterns available out of the box, and more can always be created easily. If we look at one such 24/7 shift pattern, the 4-on, 4-off pattern, you can see this supports different teams and different shifts. And in this particular example, there is a team on the job at all times, day and night. Note that the composition of these teams is user-defined, and you can set position requirements per shift to make sure that a particular group of skill sets is always on the job. You can use Interact's biometric time clocks to capture in and out time, including lunch in, out, or meeting in, out. You can define as many clocks as you want, and you can assign them a location and a named entrance for this location. You can also associate a time clock with a particular project or activity so that the system can automatically apply this logic to any and all clock ins and outs from this time clock. If we look here, you can see that you can define default rounding rules, grace time rules, and much more, and these rules can be applied to all clocks or can be made specific to a particular clock. Payroll parameters can be set at the employer level, and they can be modified at the employee group level. This way, all high-level rules are shared by all employees and distinction is made through the use of the employee groups. One of the most important payroll parameters, and a key one to determine which employee groups to define, is the payroll calendar, which determines the pay frequency. Interact HRMS supports all standard pay frequencies, including weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly, quarterly, and annual, but can even support unique user-defined pay periods. Within a single employer, each employee group can have a different pay frequency. Now let's move to the compensation and deduction policies, which are defined under the payroll. These policies, like all policies, are very configurable and fully user-defined. Interact has separate setup forms for the different types of compensation elements because each have some unique behavior. That is why there is a separate definition form for earnings, which are usually time-dependent, and other elements which usually are not time-dependent, like allowances, bonuses, commissions, benefits, expenses, and, of course, deductions. Each one of them has their own definition screens, but share a consistent logic. If we look at this earning definition form, you'll see that we have the header info with standard descriptions, codes, etc. Then we move into more specific logic in case this earning should be used for previous pay period adjustments, or if it is an overtime earning. Here you can see we can specify whether this earning is taxable. We can also determine the start and stop date, since all pay elements in Interact HRMS are effective dated. This brings us to the very versatile calculation method. You can use scripts, advanced formulas using the expression builder, rate tables, flat amounts, percentages, or any other relevant logic. Once the calculation method is defined, you can configure the labor distribution rules for this particular earning and select whether the cost should be distributed by cost center, contract, or project. You will also link the earning with specific employee groups and organization units, so that whoever is hired in this employee group and org unit will automatically inherit the correct policies. Keep in mind that all these settings can be modified at the employee level if needed, so you have the flexibility to work with any number of exceptions you want, but you can automate to the highest degree, depending on the level of complexity of your business. The same logic applies to all other definition screens for payroll and compensation. Here I can show some unique features of the various forms. Benefits usually have initial accrued amounts to start with, which are brought in during data migration upon the initial setup of the system. Benefits also link with benefit providers or third parties. There are unique rate table formats, and there is a distinction made between employer contribution versus employee contribution. If we look at deductions, on the other hand, we see that you can assign a deduction priority to give one deduction priority over another. There is an option to use the minimum take-home pay feature to stop the system from deducting beyond a certain level, and there is an option to create a deduction which will be used as a previous pay period excess deduction adjustment. As you can see, each pay element has its own behaviors and peculiar options. In the same manner, there is a setup area for garnishments. You will create the type, the classification, and the rules. Link it with deductions, link it with payees, and once all of this is set up, the system will automatically process garnishment orders as per your state rules, withhold the correct amount from the employee's wages, and process the payment to the correct payees. Now, let's take a look at 3 other examples of policy setup. We'll quickly take a look at onboarding, performance management, and risk management. The onboarding module allows you to first of all determine which stages of onboarding you want to use in your organization. You can name them as you want or stick with the default before first day, first week, and so on. Then you can define all the types of activities and documents which play a role in your onboarding process. You will then set up the actual activities, determine who will be the process champions and process owners of each activity, and how and when these activities will be assigned. You can create different uniform types, business card types, badges, and much more. You will define your own checklists in the system, which will ensure that all activities are tracked and can be monitored. Performance management also has a very extensive setup. You first of all can choose whether your process will be planned or unplanned, who is involved in it, how frequent the appraisals take place, which dimensions would be appraised, and then you set up the measurement rating, and you can choose which fields should be displayed on the appraisal forms. After this is done, you can go and create the content of the performance plans and appraisals. These are completely user-defined. You choose the performance groups and the performance elements, and link them with the jobs, job groups, etc., which were earlier defined in the job classification. You can also choose who will be the actors involved in the process, and when and how they should be notified. Finally, one more example of the 80 different modules in Interact is risk management. This module is an enterprise-level risk management solution, which allows organizations to identify risk, assess the risk, create risk mitigation plans, and then follow up on these mitigation plans through reviews to ensure that those individuals who have been assigned a task to be completed in order to mitigate a material risk have actually done their job. The entire risk framework is configurable. You define the risks you want to track. You define risk types, risk sources, risk consequences, and choose which risk officers will be on which risk committees. You can use the module to track HR risk, but the framework is flexible enough to allow you to track an operational, legal, or financial risk. Through the use of alerts, workflow reporting, and self-service, the entire organization will be aware of the latest developments pertaining to risk monitoring, and all relevant people can be informed instantly of actions that need to be taken.